Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
On the show today, we have cartoon historian and wonderful guy, Jerry Beck. He's been on the podcast a couple of times talking cartoons, and he has a very special project that he's working on now. He is working with MeTV to build an entire channel devoted specifically to cartoons. And we're going to hear a little bit about that, but more than that, we're going to hear a little more from Jerry about why cartoons still appeal to people after all these years. People like me and John who are cartoon nuts. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you back.
Jerry, let's talk briefly about what MeTV wants to do. It's just going to be an entire channel with nothing but cartoons. And I saw from the announcement that they were going to put this channel together that mostly they're going to use some of the older cartoons. I know MeTV already has morning cartoons for kids, and most of those are old Popeye and old Betty Boop and some of the really older cartoons. Mm-hmm. Are those cartoons going to be featured on that channel?
Oh, yeah. Those cartoons that are there are going to be featured, and it's going to be supplemented with maybe 100% more of all the other studios that wherever. MeTV, an important note is that MeTV and this new channel, MeTV TOONS, is not aimed at kids. You said that they have these shows at 7 o'clock for the kids.
Right.
That's not the intention. In fact, if you look at the commercials that they run on that show for insurance or, all kinds of, prescription drugs and things like that. It's, I guess, I don't know if there's a name for it. I call it a nostalgia channel. Mm-hmm. Obviously MeTV is extremely successful. In fact, it's the, I say this as somebody who's just barely involved, but clearly everybody's heard of it now. I actually go around when I talk to people and ask them if they even ever heard of the channel at all. And people go, yeah, that's the one with the cartoons, or that's the one with Spenguli or something like that. And they all know about it.
Right.
And I'm really, really, really happy about that. The guy who runs the network, Neil Saban, he's the head man. He's the guy behind that channel and several others that the company he works for. The company is Weigel Broadcasting out of Chicago. They have several channels on the air. They have they call it Movies. It's a movies channel.
Yes.
They have one called The Catchy Comedy. That's all just comedy shows, that kind of thing. Sitcoms. And they have several others. I'm forgetting. Heroes and Icons is one of them. And but MeTV in its mix of things is the most successful. And Neil's a great guy, and he's a collector. He's a film collector. I was the same way. I'm the same way. Afflicted with that problem way back when in the let's say the 70s, 80s. Where we didn't have yet the DVD, we didn't have cable channels, we didn't have 24-hour streaming, and all the things we have today. So people like Neil and I, we would collect film, 16 millimeter film, and it was the one way that you could watch some of these old shows. And he got involved with the TV and the TV networks and Weigel Broadcasting and local channels. And now we live in an era where a local channel can be picked up, on cable systems and as what they call digital sub channels. And so they're really broadcast channels is what they are. They're not cable. They're not streaming. They're literally over the air antenna broadcast. But yes, some cable systems do pick up MeTV and those sort of channels. He really wanted the cartoons, and he spent a long time getting them. And he finally got them. I mean, it took years, and they put them on a show where they put a host, like the kind of thing the audience for this channel might remember when they were kids, a hosted show with a puppet. And long story short, that's my way of skipping over things I shouldn't talk about yet. the cartoon shows were doing very, very well for the channel. They turned out to be, pretty highly rated. And wherever they put the cartoons, they started running them on Saturday mornings without the hosts, a block of Bugs Bunny, a block of Woody Woodpecker, and things like that, block of Popeye. And those did really, really, really well, too. And what Neil realized was that the people that he's talking to get Perry Mason, well, that comes from Viacom, Paramount. CBS, to get Star Trek. He runs Star Trek. Comes from the same place. Leave It to Beaver comes from Universal Pictures. I don't know if I think he runs Bewitched. He runs a lot of the Sony shows that are owned by Columbia Pictures, Sony Screen Gems, and other all the studios that happen to have old libraries of old TV shows. And he realized that, well, wait a minute, they also have these cartoons that nobody's running. And when he started running them, they were doing very well. And he's like, I'm going to call up Universal and see if they have the old Woody Woodpeckers I remember from when I was a kid. And that's exactly what happened. He called them up and he was able to make a deal to put the Woody Woodpecker cartoons on MeTV. And the next thing you know, kind of like a snowball rolling down the hill, it's like, well, what has this studio got? And what have these guys got? And how come nobody's seeing these cartoons in years and years? And that's kind of the beginning of the idea of MeTV Toons. I mean, I was talking to him and we were, we're on the same page about this sort of thing. And I, piped in with, well, Universal also has the Casper cartoons. And, I remembered where a lot of those cartoons are kind of buried, literally. And the idea of a network started to take off. And right now we've been spending a lot of time. We've been involved with it for a long time. I'm going to see even over a year in the forming of it and the making of it. And we're racing to hit the the launch date of June 25th as the start of it. And to me, it's going to be a work in progress for a while because there's a lot of shows and a lot of cartoons and a lot of the ones you remember. And don't ask because I'm not going to reveal some of the secrets because we're going to bring on newer and older. And when I say newer, I mean new old, meaning older shows that haven't been on TV in 60 years or 50 years or 40 years. There's a lot of stuff that you will, when I mention them in the future, you'll be like, oh, I forgot about that. Oh my God, I want to see that again. You're going to have that feeling when you hear about it. The channel is also has also partnered with Warner Brothers to make it happen. So we not only have the Warner cartoons that we've had, which also include the Tom and Jerry, MGM Tex Avery, and Popeye cartoons, but we're now getting everything that Warner Brothers has. What that means is all the Hanna-Barbera TV cartoons. Now, by the way, when I say all of these things, we do have some things that are post 1990, but most of the material I'm talking about is 1990 back, and I mean 1970 back, really, and or 80, the good stuff, and it's insane. And I'll tell you another thing. I'll throw out another things I think I can say. For example, Warner Brothers in partnering is all in on this, so much so that they've gone back to their original camera negatives of all the Hanna-Barbera shows. And at the moment, a giant restoration is happening. And those shows will look like you've never seen them before. And I'm talking about all the nooks and cranny programs that they own the rights to. So it's for me, it's unbelievable. It's exciting. This is a dream come true that this channel can exist. And in the way it is going to be. People involved like Neil and me who know what the cartoons are. It's not like they're just anonymously handed to programmers. That's the way it is at Boomerang. I mean, I think Boomerang is an all automated thing anyway. It's just,
right.
It doesn't feel like you have a human beings behind it. This one you will.
That's such an interesting distinction, isn't it? I don't like watching television where no hand has set foot before. You know, I kind of like watching TV that has some kind of human presence there. And part of the fun when I was a kid of watching cartoons was sort of having fun with an adult vicariously watching the same thing, whether it was Sheriff John or whoever it was, you know. But at any rate, Don knows what I'm talking about too, that you could tell the difference, as you were just saying, between a completely automated outfit and an outfit where somebody could give you fresh reactions or real reactions.
One of the things I'm doing that people will see is there's going to be interstitial material between cartoons at the end of the half hour and things like that. I'm working on a whole series called Cartoon College. And my good friend Bob Bergen, who is the voice of Porky Pig, he's a well-known Hollywood voice actor. He's been engaged to be the voice of the network, to do the coming up next, that kind of thing. And he's also the narrator of these Cartoon College spots that we're doing that'll go in deep dive and also have fun with the cartoons. You know what? I'm so in the midst of it, and I've done so many of them, way over 100. And I'm still working on them, that it's hard for me to remember, you know, what I even did last week on writing them. But we're like right now at this exact minute, I'm writing one about explaining some of the pun titles of the cartoon, you know, because a lot of people don't understand, you know, for example, I'm trying to think some very quickly here, but they don't even understand. Like I'm looking at my little list here, and there was a Tweety and Sylvester. It's actually Sylvester and a dog, called Defiant Ones, which was a parody of the movie The Defiant Ones.
Yeah,
and
right.
There was similarly a Tweety and Sylvester called Rebel Without Claws, which of course is a rebel without a cause.
Right,
So,
there you go.
And on and on. So we're going to explain that if that needs. And that's one of hundreds of ideas for these things that we've done. We're going to go deep dive into the directors and animators. We're gonna, it's great. It's gonna be a lot of fun. There'll be a lot of clips. These are just the interstitials. The cartoons, like I say, especially the things we're digging up. I just can't believe it. That's really my own. I can't believe I'm involved. I mean, you know, we've been talking about it. It was pie in the sky and speculation for a while, and slowly, it's become real. And you know, so I'm kind of on pins and needles myself to see what happens once we launch and how the reaction is in the real world. I feel this is the time has come for this sort of channel. I mean, yes, it existed. It was Cartoon Network. There was Boomerang. It's been there before, but I've always had a dream of this, what we're doing here, which is to get the cartoons from all the different studios. Yes. That isn't just one studio's preference, that the whole history of animation is reflected. In fact, we're going to have silent animation, black and white cartoons.
Fabulous.
We're going to have everything. I mean, I'm forgetting all the things that are planned, and no one should watch it on day one and the first week or month and think, okay, I've seen it. I don't feel like I need to see this anymore. No one should think that, because we're going to be introducing new things, new ideas, new older shows that haven't been on, older cartoon libraries that are taking us right now a while to get in. So things are going to be debuting in that first 6 months, and it's going to be, just fantastic. That's all I can say. It's one of my bucket list dreams that I never thought could ever come true, would be to somehow be involved with the Cartoon Network the way I'd like to see it. And that's what this is. So it's really a culmination of a lot of things I've done, in my life.
Jerry, it reminds me a lot of two things. In the nostalgic / curating thing, it reminds me of TCM a lot and what they're doing with old films.
Yep.
And second of all, some of the interstitial things that you're talking about remind me of the things that you did with, for example, my introduction to you was to buy the CDs for the Warner Brothers cartoons when that big collection was released. And you were one of the people that were doing the commentaries
Right.
And it sounds a lot like the commentaries that are with those CDs, and also the small little vignettes that were packaged as part of the extras.
Again, lots in progress, a lot of stuff I can't talk about yet. But I love that you made the reference to TCM. I was thinking of saying that, but I didn't want to say it. But the fact that you said it makes me very, very happy, because Neil said to me at one point, he wants this to be the TCM of animation. I'm like, whatever you want, I'm here. I will obey. I want to see this. You know, I started my career in the 70s, literally started my career. I worked somewhere for a living that wasn't in the movie business in the very beginning of my career. But I met Leonard Maltin back then, and way back in the 70s, before he was famous or anything, and he was just writing books and the great movie shorts and things like that.
Before he had a beard?
No, he had a beard.
Okay. He probably always had a beard.
And we should mention that Leonard Maltin is well known, I think, partly for his review books. I think largely for his review books that are used by a lot of people to figure out whether they want to see the next movie on TCM.
No, I worked on some of those books. He was actually teaching a very modest animation history class. This was in the 70s, before that idea was a real thing that it is today. But back then it was non-existent. And I went to that class, and right away from the beginning, I'm like, well, you did a book on the movie shorts, you know, and did you ever think of doing one on cartoons? And he really hadn't, even though he was teaching a class about it. And it took a few years, and I stuck with him. We became friends. We became like instant friends and colleagues. And I started doing, there were no books. There was no internet. There was no Wikipedia, no web pages, there weren't even fanzines. There was one or two fanzines, but you know, I wanted what we did in a book that I worked with Leonard as his research associate, a book called Of Mice and Magic, which came out in 1980. You know, that was like considered now one of the first books on the history of American animation studios. There were books on Disney, but there were no books about Fleischer. There were no books about, you know, UPA, or hardly anything written about Warner Cartoons, MGM, all those. There were hardly any of that stuff. And one of the things I did as his research associate on the book was to compile the filmographies of all the studios. There was nowhere to see that. Today you can go on Wikipedia and say, let me see the list of all the Looney Tunes. But back then there was literally nowhere to go. And one thing I went to Warner Brothers, and we had good relationships with people back then, and at the different studios, and the studios didn't even know. Some of them didn't even know they owned any old cartoons. But they even Warner's really didn't have a master list. I said, okay, we got to make a list. We got to put the plot synopses and who gets the director credit, and we just had to do it. Me and Leonard, and then later with my friend Will Friedwald, we got together and we went more deep dive onto that. And that was the beginning of my crazy career. And my dream with this channel, I mean, I never really could have had this dream before, is that I'd like all the films that we have listed in Of Mice and Magic in the filmography to somehow be on this channel. I don't know if we can, and when I say that, by the way, I'm not counting Disney. We haven't even approached Disney. We're not going to approach Disney. We wouldn't approach, Disney. Disney will not, I'm sure, be involved with this. They have their own outlets.
Yeah, they have their own plus.
Yeah, what's sad though is they don't have everything on there. They don't have, I'm not even talking about features they don't have, but on the shorts they have like a third, maybe a fourth of their library. It's kind of criminal, in my opinion.
We'll return to the musical Innertube in just a moment, but first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Jerry Beck is the editor of two cartoon-based websites, cartoonresearch.com and animationscoop.com.
Among the many books Jerry has written are The Animated Movie Guide, Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, and Not Just Cartoons, Nicktoons, an overview of 31 cartoons that appeared on Nickelodeon.
And he co-authored a book with film critic Leonard Moulton titled Of Mice and Magic, A History of American Animated Cartoons.
You can email Jerry at jerrybeck, that's JerryBeck 18 @gmail.com.
And now, back to the Musical Innertube, already in progress.
I have a question, Jerry, and it's a naive question, but I'd love you to talk more about this. One thinks of cartoons, they lie around, copies of them in this warehouse and that private collection. And how do you get your hands on some of these collections? I'm wondering how does one put one's hands on these cartoons?
Well, you mean when you say how does one? Are you talking about this channel or
Yes, I mean, how do you go around finding out where things are when often the people who have those things don't know where they are?
Well, I've been doing this since the 1970s, and I had to find out. I wanted to know. I remember when I was in high school, and everybody else was a normal person, but I went home and watched cartoons. But I'd come home and there'd be Casper for a half hour, followed by Bugs Bunny. This is what got me into it. I'm going to answer your question, I promise.
No problem.
And you'd start off with the Harvey Toons logo, and the Casper would come on. And then Bugs Bunny would come on. And I kind of, while I'm working on my homework and I had this stuff on in the background, that's when I began to notice as a teenager that, hey, wait a minute, these Bugs Bunny cartoons are funny. These Warner cartoons are really, I feel like they're talking to me. I really felt like they were aimed not at the kids. But so initially, I immediately got some taste because I could tell the difference between the Casper type cartoon and the Warner Brothers cartoon. And clearly the Warner's ones were a little better. Then I started to notice the director credits, the ones by Chuck Jones or Bob Clampett were more, a favorite to me that I liked a lot more. Not to put anybody down. I've learned to appreciate them all now. And I wanted to know more. There was nowhere to go. So I made it my life, to know where these things are. Now, you're saying, how would you know? That's one reason we did the book. People didn't know. I didn't know until we started really researching this, that the Paramount meaning the Casper cartoons, were actually released in theaters by Paramount Pictures. Now, who knew that? There's no Paramount logo on them, and it says Harvey Toons. Well, I did all the research. I figured out where did these come from? How were they shown? Where were they shown? And today, do these companies still own them or not? In the case of, just to pick the Harvey Toons, which I'm a fan of now, that was Paramount kind of didn't care about their cartoons that much. And in the 1950s and 60s, when TV really emerged on the market, a lot of studios, wanted to sell their cartoons directly to TV, but Paramount had some problems in that regard. They had been sued already, and they didn't want to get in trouble with their theater owners, and they didn't want the Paramount logo to show up on Saturday mornings. It was a big issue back then. Theater exhibition played a bigger part than TV sales back in those days. But they still wanted to make a couple of $1 million selling their old cartoons to TV, and they ended up, again, long story short, they ended up selling the cartoon, the actual film rights to the company that was doing the licensed comic books, and that was Harvey Comics. They were doing licensed comic books, and they talked them into a deal where Harvey bought the rights to these cartoons of the 1950s, and they made a deal with ABC immediately to put them on TV, and that's the story there. And so from that point on, they took the Paramount logos off, and they Harvey Toons begat. Now, being the nut that I am, and throughout the years, and this is like, take this story and magnify it at least tenfold, I've followed where these cartoons are, just because, for a variety of reasons. Because part of what I've done in my life, is I've done the DVDs, I've done programs in museums and festivals and repertory theaters where I show old cartoons. So I kind of want to know where everything is so I can maybe get them and show them. I've also worked unbelievably like fate for companies. I worked for Nickelodeon, and when I worked for Nickelodeon, I had access to whatever they owned the rights to at that time, which were Terry Toon cartoons and old Max Fleischer cartoons. I've worked for Disney. I've worked for Warner Brothers. So wherever I've worked, I've been able to do a little more research while I was there. So to cap the story, today, again, leaving out all the intricate trail, but today the Harvey Toons are owned by Universal Pictures. They acquired them because at one point, again, leaving out tons of detail, at one point, DreamWorks bought the rights to those cartoons. Didn't do anything with them, but when Universal bought DreamWorks, that went along with them. And thus, you have a perfect example of when you talk to people at Universal, they don't know they own them, but they do. And we broke through that. We convinced them that we know that they own them. We showed them the chain of where things went, and they dug them out, and we're going to run them on MeTV TOONS. They're part of what we're going to be running.
Can I just say that this is an amazing research story? As a career researcher myself, I just love stuff like this. I love the people who pioneer the trails. And it's so funny to think of you folks going in and telling this big corporation, yes, you do own these. We could prove it to you. And they're on the other side of the desk going, we don't own these. Yes, you do. No, you do own these. Look, you own this guy who was part of that guy. But you did the pioneering work, which is to me so interesting. I imagine there are a few other people who do this, but it just seems,
I've been very out front about on my blog, on my website called Cartoon Research. I have a page somewhere if one can find it's frequently asked questions. And so when I started it 23 years ago, when I started my blog, I put it on this FAQ page, and I made up the questions. I'm like, hey, which studios own, which cartoons? And I did a list, which I update all the time. And it's just mainly the cartoons that are listed in Of Mice and Men, the old Hollywood studio cartoons. And I'm pretty good at it. I have to say I'm pretty good at knowing. And if I don't know, what's great is in this job, I've had to track down. I won't get into the intricacies of it, but another library that we have on MeTV TOONS is, of course, the J. Ward Rocky and Bullwinkle library. And guess what? No one that I know would know where they were because they weren't where you might think they were. They travel around. I won't give it away actually right now, but they were at one time being controlled by Disney. There was another time where Universal had the rights. That was around the period when they did that Rocky and Bullwinkle movie. And then there was another period where DreamWorks owned the rights around that time when they did a Peabody and Sherman movie. But today it's owned by another company that took me a while to track down. And but we did, and we will we now, and it's a company nobody's ever heard of. I guarantee you, it's a small company. It's just the weirdest thing. I'm fascinated now by the fact that there's actually a bunch of cartoons. I'm going to leave names out because I have to, but there's a bunch of a series that are classic things we all grew up with. This group here that haven't been seen in 40 to 50 years. And they're mainly owned by families. J. Ward stuff is actually owned by the Ward estate. They just go to different studios to let them handle the business work, of distributing it. But a lot of stuff is handled by families that seemingly, again, based on some of my conversations with them, I said, is there a business in this? I don't see these cartoons on any TV in America. He goes, well, this series is big in England, and this one's big in South America, and they make money licensing it to foreign countries, really. So it's about time they came home, I think.
One of the things that struck me when we first started talking was that you brought up the word nostalgia, and that's one of the reasons why a whole channel full of older cartoons would appeal to somebody, and it does. I bought all those DVDs with Warner Brothers cartoons on them and just ate them up. I just thought they were great. Whereas my granddaughter looked at them and goes, oh yeah, what the heck? But she's meanwhile watching Steven Universe
Right.
and all the other stuff that came later, and those
Right.
are gold to her.
Right.
So
Well,
I guess
yeah.
it's whoever you grew up with
Yeah.
that you're going to watch. And because you have such a wide range of cartoons to present, you are going to get adults to teenagers to kids watching this channel.
Well, one thing I have learned throughout the years, and especially more so recently, I mean, I've always heard my whole life, they say animation is evergreen. That's why Disney was able to re-release his features every 7 years back when we were kids. And no, we didn't think of them as old movies. You know, Bambi is from 1942. What 1942 movie is being reissued, you know, later and, you know, that kind of thing. When we go back to the Camera and Eggs, which the most recent DVDs and Blu-rays and the prints or the versions that we show on regular MeTV are restored from the original negatives. They look brand new. You wouldn't know that they're old except by the references that might be in the films. And the TV cartoons, this is another weird shocker, they really look like they were made yesterday by Nickelodeon or something. I mean, they really look new when you go back to the original master material, which is what's going on and what people will see on this channel. In fact, MeTV runs, I think, the Flintstones right now, and that's all from the master material. It, in our lifetime, maybe if we were watching it as I did in the 60s on primetime, you know, it hasn't looked that good since those days. You know, we grew up in a period where the history of animation was presented to us on television, free. It was beamed into our brains, and we had everything. And we even had watched the Mickey Mouse Club. You had the Disney cartoons, and you had, you know, Woody Woodpecker with Walter Lantz explaining how he makes cartoons, and all that stuff from the 40s, 30s, you know, and 50s were available to us to be seen. My point is that, you know, it doesn't matter. Those films are beyond kids' films. I don't personally believe they were ever made for kids. Even Casper, they were shown in movie theaters. They were all audiences saw them. They were directed and written on high for the whole audience. And yes, kids loved them. In particular, there were Saturday matinees, and but grown-ups did too. Especially the Warner cartoons, the Avery cartoons, the Fleischer cartoons, a lot of the Disney cartoons, believe it or not. You know, all audiences really, really loved them. They were the equivalent of a comic strip in the daily newspaper. You read it, you throw the paper away, and you really never see it again. That's the way the cartoons were. They were considered like comic strips at the movies, and they were just there for that month or 2 or 3 at the time they came out, up until about 46, 7, 8. They didn't even reissue the cartoons. They just made them new all the time. And then they got the idea to save some money and do re-releases. But there was still no thinking of selling them to television. TV was the enemy back in the 40s and 50s. It was taking people away from coming to the movies. So there's no thought of selling these things to TV. And no thought of even showing them again. And that's why they have topical references. That's why it's the Depression in the 1930s. That's why Bugs Bunny is in the army. That's why, you know, it was what was going on at that time, you know, and we got to see all that stuff on TV and grow up with it and have it in our brains. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but Warner Brothers was using those cartoons to sell some of their sheet music. Because, when I watched cartoons when I was a kid, I knew the tune to Shuffle Off to Buffalo. I knew, all sorts of different songs that I would later encounter in a different context and go, wait a minute, I know that music. Where do I know that music from? It wound up being cartoons.
Yeah, I know. I love that, actually. When I so know them from the cartoons that when I see any of the old movies and they're playing some song I know from a cartoon, I kind of get, I just go nuts. I love that. Yeah, that was the original thing behind the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. Warner's and most studios, even MGM, most of these studios reluctantly were dragged into the world of doing cartoons. Disney's cartoons were so popular in the early 30s that theaters demanded them. When you went to, when they went to the movies, back in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s, people saw the movie, might see a double bill. They might have a program of shorts that would include things like comedy shorts like The Three Stooges or Laurel and Hardy. It might include travelogues, newsreels, serial chapters, on and on and on. It was a big, crazy program. There are reasons for why that was, but I won't go into that now. And the thing is, the cartoon was the staple. It was the absolute thing that audiences demanded. They got upset if a cartoon wasn't on the program. And you got to remember that except for some of the big downtown theaters that might play a movie for a week and maybe hold it over second week, that was a big deal if a movie was so popular that it was held over. Most theaters, neighborhood theaters, changed their bill 2 or 3 times a week. So they had this giant collection of films and shorts and stuff twice or 3 times a week. So people went to the movies all the time to see the newsreels and all that. So to keep up with the demand of theaters in the 30s and 40s that might need 3 cartoons in a week, every studio had to get involved. Every studio had to have a program of animation one way or another. And that's why we have so many. That's why all the studios did it. That's why some of them don't care later on, because that's old news. We did that. That's over.
Again, like the newspapers, just throw them away.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed they kept them, but I've researched it because the more I think about it, it's like, why did they even hold on to them? And they held on to them because they were assets of the company. And if something were to happen, which eventually did on many cases, they could sell them. They knew they could sell them if it came to it. Like, it's one thing to own the copyright to this, but if you don't have the physical asset, of the thing, your company is worth less, or it's worth less. So they had to keep the negative, that kind of thing. The other thing I say about the ephemeral part of it, and a question that I ponder, is we get a lot of our armchair animation critics these days, and they're like, I don't like the Pepe Le Pews. They're all the same. Or I can't watch those Caspers. It's the same story over and over. You know what? It was. Why did they do that? They did it because these were ephemeral. Because once you saw one of them, the first time they did it, and it got a great reaction, 2 years went by, and they, let's make another one of those. Yep. They didn't think to reissue it. They thought, let's just make another one. Now, what gets me is that's how you can really tell the geniuses, the Tex Averys, the Chuck Jones, because Hanna-Barbera with Tom and Jerry. Someone could say to you, hey, I've seen a Tom and Jerry. I've seen them all. And kind of you haven't. They actually are different in each cartoon. And similarly with the Roadrunner from Chuck Jones.
I was just going to say the Roadrunner is the same thing every single time.
It is, except it isn't.
But the brilliance is the variations on the theme.
Right.
And that's where you see someone like Chuck Jones who's able to really think up stuff that you hadn't seen anywhere else.
Part of that was, it's come out in interviews with them in later years, that was their choice. There were some studios, I won't name them, we'll probably have them on our channel, but there's some studios that were a little bit, the budgets were lower and, let's just do that again. And they would remake a cartoon or this or that. The people at Warner's and Tex Avery and Hanna-Barbera in particular, and Disney in general and others, they didn't want to do the same thing again. If they're going to use the same character or same premise, they did it a different way. They did it for themselves. They imagined they were the audience and somehow imagined that the audience would remember the last one. So they would redo it, in a different way. And that only makes those cartoons better. And those guys really were geniuses, really.
Yeah, definitely. Jerry, thanks for being with us today. Could you give a plug a couple of times, not just to this new cartoon channel, but also to the stuff you're working on? You mentioned Cartoon Research, your blog. What other things could people check in with online to follow cartoons and follow what you guys who are chasing cartoons are doing?
Well, I mean, one of the other things I do, I can't invite people to, is I teach at Cal Arts and several schools in the Southern California area. But the main thing is my Cartoon Research blog. Every day we try to post something new about the history of animation. And of course, there's something big news, like there's a new channel we'll break in and talk about that. But I've got the Cartoon Research Facebook group. Being the old man that I am, Facebook's good enough for me. I don't need to TikTok, this sort of thing. But those are the main places where people can check in. I would highly recommend that. I'm always available. Just look me up online and you'll find me.
All right. And the MeTV TOONS channel premieres when?
June 25th. And I don't know where you can all find it, except that most of the big cities and most places in general, if you've got MeTV, you're most likely it's going to be playing in your area. It's going to be on one of the channels in your area. Oh, and let me say this, very important. If for some unknown reason you look into where is this MeTV TOONS channel playing and you find out it's not playing in your area, right now, immediately contact any of the local broadcast channels that do the sub-channel thing that play MeTV, or even if they don't play MeTV, it's available to them if they seek it out. So we need people to do that because we want to be everywhere, and so and we can't be everywhere. So we need you to be our local agent to see if it's going to be on or not, and help us out there.
Okay, so that's homework for all you guys. And you can do your homework while you're watching cartoons the way Jerry used to back in the old days. Jerry Beck, thanks very much for being on with us today.
Terrific, yeah.
You're welcome. Thanks, both you guys.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.